Hello, my friends. Привет, moi druzy. Today is day 330 in this war in Ukraine. Okay, today the theme is the story behind the story. We're going to try to unpack some things that are going on behind the scenes. So we'll talk about the politics of getting tanks. We'll talk about the missile strike that happened last week and Jake Broe's amazing connection when he was talking about the missile strike. We'll talk about the tragedy behind the tragedy of the helicopter crash that just happened yesterday. We'll talk about Ukraine courting China, which sounds interesting, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about some fun with Russian state media. Okay, we're going to start with the British intelligence update. So the British said that Russia is likely considering deploying a small number of its new T14 Armada main battle tanks in Ukraine. Okay, those are newer tanks. They look something like this. Now, pro-government Russia media outlets claim T14s were being prepared for deployment, which is good news to them. High-risk decision, however, for Russia, because the program's been dogged with delays, reduction in planned fleet size, manufacturing problems. They said an additional challenge for Russia is adjusting to the logistics chain to handle the T-14 because it's larger and heavier than other Russian tanks. And then finally, if Russia deploys the T-14, it will likely be primarily for propaganda purposes, not for the firepower, which I found to be amazingly interesting. Okay, now, Putin hasn't given up on this fight. In fact, Petraeus just said this in the Financial Times a few days ago. This is an inflection point because Russia is taking steps which clearly indicate that they don't think this war is lost. So they're ramping up their manpower. They're ramping up their industrial power. They're doing all these things. At the same time, we see help coming from the Western countries, the allies as well. But it's not going fast enough. It never is going to be going fast enough for Zelensky, and with good reason. He's got the weight of the world on his shoulders, trying to shepherd his people through this disastrous time. So when Zelensky spoke at Davos, he called on partner countries not to delay military assistance. Quote, "We cannot travel on motivation." What a great line. There are specific things on which durability depends. These are specific things that we expect. When you say, "I will give tanks," when someone else will give tanks, it seems to me that this is not a very correct strategy. Now, he was talking to German Chancellor Olaf Scholz with that statement because the Germans are saying, well, we'll give tanks, but only as soon as the United States or whoever else gives the tanks because they don't want to be left holding the bag. I don't think they really have to worry about that because countries are doing what they can to provide assistance to Ukraine. For example, the Estonian government has supported Defense Minister Pekur's proposal to provide Ukraine with its largest military aid package worth euros of 113 million. Now, that doesn't sound like much until you realize that Estonia, as a country, it only has a 1.33 million as population. That's like the size of the state of Maine. So it's a tiny little country, but they're all in giving to Ukraine. At the same time, the Pentagon is looking to move equipment. Here, the U.S. Department of Defense has asked forces stationed in South Korea to provide equipment to help Ukraine, but only where it has zero impact on its operations in the Asian country. U.S. Forces Korea has some 28,500 troops in South Korea. And now the story behind the story is that goes all the way back to the end of the Korean War. The demilitarized zone is still there. It's actively still a hotspot that has never actually been concluded. Now, here, I want to talk and shift gears about this building that was blown up by this terrible missile. Now, I was watching some other commentators talking about this and reading news articles, and this was a aircraft carrier killing missile. Now, Jake Broe did a remarkable job on this, and I'm going to show you a little clip of Jake Broe in just a moment. Now, he has insight that I don't have, and I would highly encourage you to watch him. He was a missileer, and he's got a wealth of understanding about this.
38-foot-long Delta Wing cruise missile, and here's the tech. Though the missile, with its liquid-fuel rocket engine, first entered production in the late 60s, it accelerates to Mach 3, nearly 2,300 miles per hour, before approaching its target. When the missile goes into its terminal phase, it's traveling at Mach 4, 4 times the speed of sound, 3,000 miles per hour. This missile was designed to carry a nuclear warhead and then to slam into an American aircraft carrier. This is not a precision strike weapon to take out energy nodes, energy infrastructure. So more than likely, this apartment building was not the target, but because this missile is not precise, it hit an apartment complex. It hit a building.
So when Dmitry Peskov said that we weren't aiming at the building, he might have actually been telling the truth. Now that would be a kind of rare thing for Peskov, but he might have been telling the truth. But that's not why I'm showing you this clip of Jake Broe. This is why I'm showing you this clip.
And to add insult to injury, Ukraine more than likely is being bombed by its own missiles. In 2006, to comply with the Budapest Memorandum, Ukraine gave 423 of these Kh-22 missiles back to Russia in exchange for security guarantees from the United Kingdom and the United States and a promise from Russia that Russia would never attack them. They gave up 423 of these Kh-22s. And here we are in 2023, and Russia is using them to terrorize civilians.
So that's the story behind the story, and you have to understand that story behind the story if you're going to understand where we are right now. Now, by the way, I highly recommend that you watch Jake Broe if you're trying to keep yourself informed. He's on YouTube at Jake Broe, and I watch him fairly regularly. We don't actually say the same stuff because while we have a very similar format, he sees things that I don't see and vice versa. So please go watch Jake Broe and inform yourself even more. Okay, let's shift gears again and look at more story behind the story. So yesterday there was this terrible helicopter crash that killed more than a dozen. Ukraine's interior minister was among at least 13 people killed when a helicopter crashed near a kindergarten, and at least 3 children were among the dead. Denis Davidov did an incredible job talking about this yesterday. There was fog. They were too close to the ground. They were like within the city. They should have been much higher and out. And he covered that well. I'm not going to. But what I want to cover is this, because I dismissed it because covering as tragic as it is, a helicopter crash is not what I'm trying to get to. But what is really interesting to my mind is who was killed. Now, I saw Interior Minister. An Interior Minister in Ukraine means something very different than Secretary of the Interior in the United States. Helicopter crash has killed Denis Monastyrsky, Ukraine's interior minister, who was reforming the nation's notoriously corrupt and brutal police force. Now, the story behind the story, if you remember back to the 2014 Maidan revolution, it was Ukrainian police turning on the civilian population at the behest of the corrupt president. That's what was actually going on, and the people stood up to that. So they've been in this process of reforming this corruption over time. So there's a lot to glean if you can just read in between the lines of what's going on here. He's one of President Vladimir Zelensky's protégés appointed to clean up Ukrainian law enforcement. The Ukraine's Interior Ministry has about 350,000 staffers and an outsized role, which includes control over emergency and migration services, as well as the border and National Guard. That's a big job. It's nothing like what I thought it was at first blush, but as you read more, you find out more. They have also built and operated the points of invincibility all over Kyiv and in other places in order to sustain during this time of being, shot at with these missiles. Okay, his predecessor, Arsen Akhov, he helped create dozens of volunteer battalions, including the Azov Regiment, to fight pro-Russian separatists, and later made them part of the police force. Askov started with widely publicized reforms that included obligatory exams and background checks for each police officer. It's something that we'd take for granted here, but it wasn't there before, and now it started to become part of the process with his predecessor. Okay, critics said, it was too easy or whatever, but still, it's moving the right direction, and that's the story, is that they keep moving the right direction. Monastyrsky's appointment, the biggest question was whether the future minister would be able to lead his ministry himself or would just have to follow what the government wanted. Would he have some independence? He was a native of the central city of Kolmensky, where he earned a law degree. He rose to fame in the 1990s as an amateur actor, part of a student comic trio named Three Fatsos. It sounds very parallel to Zelensky's rise as well. Monastyrsky met future President Zelensky, an actor who would found and lead District 95, or Kvartal 95 was the term in Ukrainian. That's the location of where their comic troupe came from. He soon joined the Servant of the People Party. He was elected to the Ukrainian Parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, and he worked on legal and police reforms. In July last year, Parliament approved his appointment as Interior Minister, At the time, the police force had a broad array of problems: low salaries, long work hours, outdated equipment, and other corruption. The reforms he proposed included better accountability, improved security measures at public schools. He also pioneered laws on the use of DNA and investigations. So the real question is, what's going to happen now that he's dead? Are we going to get another person that's going to keep moving the process forward? And I think we will, because I think they have to keep these kind of checks on corruption moving forward so that they can seamlessly merge into the EU. That's such a high priority. But I want you to understand, Ukraine has had an issue with corruption. Here's an article today. The anti-corruption authorities of Ukraine have notified the ex-head of NJSC Navigots Ukraini, Andrei Kobelev, of suspicion, who was abusing his official position, gave himself a bonus of more than essentially the equivalent in hryvnia of $10 million on January 19th, 2022. So this has been a long time coming. They've been working at that. And in 2018, the board chairman was abusing his official position. So it's been ongoing, and they're clamping down on more and more. But the big story here, the story behind the story is, look, this guy died in this helicopter crash, and he was a reformer. And will the reforms keep going? We'll just have to keep an eye on that. In other news, Dmitry Kuleba was talking about relations with China. He was talking about how, hey, how can we have a dialogue with China? Quote, under the current circumstances, the most important thing is that Russia does not benefit from China's position. This is a good start for the conversation we are striving to have with Beijing. Another quote, when we see that China is not helping Russia to circumvent sanctions, and we know that the Russians have asked for them, it's good. When we see that China does not supply Russia with military equipment, this is also good. That's right. They're thinking, instead of just writing China off as, well, they're Russia's ally, what if they can keep China sidelined? That's really good. So he's thinking about that. In fact, Zelensky is inviting China's President Xi for dialogue. So we'll see how that goes, or if anything comes of it, but they're thinking ahead. They're thinking very strategically about what they need to accomplish. Last article before fun with Russian state media, the European Parliament adopted a resolution on the establishment of a special tribunal for crime of Russian aggression against Ukraine. We'll see what the details are in time to come, but this is a huge step forward. I'm telling you, this is a big step forward. Okay, time for fun with Russian state media. First article, the U.S. is encouraging terrorist acts against Russia, says the Russian ambassador to the United States. Why? Because they're allowing for, or saying it's okay to attack the Crimean Peninsula. Now, the U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price insists that Crimea is Ukrainian territory. And apparently so does Russia. The Russian embassy tweeted a map that shows Crimea as part of the Ukraine. This was just yesterday. They were trying to brag about gasoline prices, but look at Ukraine. Look how in yellow. And here's the original tweet. Now, look in yellow. Ukraine. Crimea is still in yellow with the rest of Ukraine. So it's kind of a faux pas for the Russians. Pretty bad form considering what their claims are, but I agree with this map. I think that's right. We have our perennial favorite. If Ukraine strikes Crimea with U.S. weapons, Russia retaliation will be devastating. Really? More devastating than whatever you've been trying to do? If you could do more devastating, wouldn't you have done more devastating already? Ex-Russian president warns of nuclear scenario in Ukraine. More of the same saber-rattling. Morons demanding a Russian defeat in Ukraine seem to be oblivious to the fact that such an outcome could result in nuclear escalation, says former President Dmitry Medvedev. And then he goes on to say, not one of those morons is apparently willing to make the next logical step. A loss by a nuclear power in a conventional war may trigger the start of a nuclear war. Nuclear powers never lost a major conflict on which their fate depended. Okay, so again, it's more of that same saber rattling meant to deter the United States from giving the weapons that the Ukrainians actually need. Dmitry Chernian, 2023 will be a make-or-break year for Russia. Now, he's a research professor of economics, and he said that the longer the conflict in Ukraine lasts, the more it resembles uncompromising confrontation between Russia and the U.S.-centric Western countries. The stakes are extremely high for all sides. And then he said something I thought was amazing that he said, because you can go to jail or be fined for this. What started out as a, quote, special military operation may very well become a, quote, patriotic war. Now, it was okay for him to say that yesterday because it was the anniversary of a big thing within the Great Patriotic War, but he used the word war, and you can't do that. You can be fined or go to jail for it. Okay, finally, Russian Orthodox Church issues an apocalyptic warning. This is Patriarch Kirill. Any attempts to destroy Russia could spell disaster for the entire world. The head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, warned on Thursday. The primate claimed that both the international community and Russia are facing very huge threats. According to Patriarch Kirill, the root of the problem is that some madmen believe that Russia, which has powerful weapons and is populated by extremely strong people who have never given in to any enemy and have always emerged victorious, could be defeated under the current circumstances. And then he gives the greatest argument for why separation of church and state is a great idea, because you really don't want the church running the government, and you don't want the government running the church or having the church as its lapdog, because then they say things like this: we pray to the Lord so that he enlightens those madmen and helps them to understand that any desire to destroy Russia will mean the end of the world. Okay, so he's in Putin's pocket, and everybody knows it. It's not real, like, he's dependent on Putin for his power, and he's supporting Putin along the way. So hopefully that helped you understand the stories behind the stories today. If you got some value out of that, please give me a like, share, ask me a question. I'll try to answer every comment that I can. If you want to know more about Zelensky, you can read my book on Amazon Kindle Unlimited for free. And thank you for cheering for Ukraine. Dyaku shoku v Boliviaze za Ukrainiu. See you tomorrow.